The old money mindset that keeps families rich for 300 years. There is a family in Europe that has been wealthy since the 1400s. Not wealthy like nice house, good neighborhood, wealthy. Wealthy like they helped finance the Renaissance. Wealthy like their banking network once stretched across 7 countries simultaneously. Wealthy like when kings needed money for wars, they came to this family. The Medici family of Florence. And here is what makes their story remarkable. It wasn't just the first generation that was rich, or the second, or the third. The Medici dynasty controlled wealth, power, and influence for over 300 years, through plagues, wars, political revolutions, and economic collapses that wiped out entire civilizations around them. How? The same question applies to the Rothschilds, to the Rockefellers, to a handful of quiet, unflashy families scattered across the world who have held on to generational wealth so long that the money itself has become almost irrelevant. It's the psychology underneath it that keeps it alive. And here is the uncomfortable truth, that psychology is learnable. It can be adopted. It can be applied by anyone, regardless of how much money they currently have or where they came from. But almost nobody talks about it. Because old money doesn't advertise. Old money doesn't post. Old money doesn't need you to know it exists. Today, we're pulling back the curtain. 5 rules, 300 years of wealth, and a lesson that could permanently change the financial story of your family. Welcome to MillionMindShift, where every story is a lesson money can't buy. Before we get into the rules, we need to understand the problem they were designed to solve. There is a saying that exists in almost every culture on Earth. In English, it goes, shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. In Italian, they say, dalle stelle alle stalle, from the stars to the stables. In Chinese, wealth never survives 3 generations. In Japanese, rice paddies to rice paddies in 3 generations. Every culture, every language, the same observation, and the research confirms it. Studies suggest that roughly 70% of wealthy families lose their wealth by the 2nd generation. By the 3rd generation, 90% of it is gone. Think about that. 9 out of 10 fortunes, built with decades of sacrifice, risk, and discipline, are gone within 60 years of being created. Not because of bad markets, not because of bad luck, but because of what gets passed down alongside the money. Or more precisely, what doesn't get passed down. The first generation builds the wealth. They remember what it was like to have nothing. Fear, discipline, and hunger drive every decision. They don't waste, they invest. They delay gratification because they have lived the alternative. The 2nd generation witnesses the building. They respect the money but don't fully understand it. They spend more than the first, save less, and begin to treat wealth as a condition of their life rather than a responsibility. The 3rd generation inherits a lifestyle. They have never known scarcity. They have never made a sacrifice for the wealth they're spending. And without the psychological foundation that created it, the money evaporates, often within a single decade. Old money families broke this cycle, deliberately, systematically, over centuries. Here is how they did it. Old money. Rule 1. Wealth is a tool, not a trophy. Walk through any old money neighborhood in the world, the Upper East Side in the 1920s, Mayfair in London, the 16th arrondissement in Paris, and you will notice something that surprises most people. The old money families are not the ones with the loudest houses. They are not the ones with the most visible cars. They are not the ones throwing the most extravagant parties. In fact, if you didn't know who they were, you might walk past them entirely. This is not an accident. It is a philosophy. Old money families teach their children from the earliest age that wealth is a tool. A tool has a purpose. A hammer is not displayed in a glass cabinet. It is used to build something. Wealth, in the old money framework, exists to generate more wealth, to create opportunity, to provide stability, and to fund legacy. It is not a scorecard. It is not a costume. New money psychology is almost the opposite. And this is not a moral judgment. It is a psychological one. When someone rises from scarcity to abundance rapidly, the brain experiences something called status signaling anxiety. The need to prove the wealth is real to yourself and to the world drives spending on visibility. Cars, watches, houses, clothes, things that say, "Look, I made it." The problem is that visibility is expensive, and expensive visibility on depreciating assets is the fastest way to erode a fortune. John D. Rockefeller, who, adjusted for inflation, remains the wealthiest American in history, was famously frugal. He kept ledger books throughout his life, recording every penny he spent. Not because he had to, but because he believed that the discipline of attention to money was the foundation of keeping it. His philosophy: wealth was not his identity. It was his instrument. Rule 1. Wealth is a tool, not a trophy. The moment you start spending to signal wealth rather than to build it, you have begun the countdown. Old money rule 2. The family is the institution. In 1744, Meyer Amschel Rothschild was born in the Jewish ghetto of Frankfurt, Germany. By the time he died in 1812, he had built the most powerful banking network in Europe. And before he died, he wrote a set of instructions for his 5 sons. He didn't write them a business plan. He didn't leave them operating manuals. He gave them a philosophy. And at the center of that philosophy was one non-negotiable principle. The family is the institution. Not any one business, not any one investment. The family itself. He sent each of his 5 sons to a different European capital, Frankfurt, Vienna, London, Naples, Paris, to establish branches of the family banking operation. And he instructed them to communicate with each other, to share intelligence, to support each other's operations, and above all, to keep wealth within the family system. For over a century, Rothschild family members were required to marry within the extended family or within a small circle of approved families. Controversial by modern standards, but the psychology behind it was ruthless in its clarity. Every decision about wealth must serve the long-term survival of the institution, and the institution is the family. Old money families formalized this in structures that new money rarely creates. Family constitutions, family councils, governance documents that outline how wealth decisions are made, how disputes are resolved, who has authority and who does not. These are not cold, corporate documents. They are expressions of a core belief that individual members of the family are temporary stewards of the wealth, not its owners. The wealth belongs to the family across time, to generations not yet born. This single shift in perspective changes every financial decision. You don't spend recklessly when you believe the money belongs not just to you, but to your grandchildren's grandchildren. Rule 2. The family is the institution. Build structures that outlive individuals. Old money rule. 3. Never spend principal. There are 3 words that appear in some form in almost every old money financial education. Never. Spend. Principal. The principal is the original capital, the core of the wealth. It is sacred. It is untouchable. What you live on, what you spend, what you enjoy, is the return generated by the principal, the interest, the dividends, the yields, never the principal itself. This sounds simple. It is extraordinarily difficult to practice, because when a crisis hits, and crises always hit, the temptation to dip into principal is overwhelming. A business fails, a market crashes, a legal battle consumes resources. The principal sits there, large and accessible, and every instinct says, use it. Old money families build legal and structural barriers to stop themselves. Trusts with disbursement restrictions. Family funds governed by committees. Accounts that require multiple signatures to access. They engineer the protection of principal into the architecture of the wealth itself because they know that willpower alone is never enough. The mathematics behind this rule are staggering. A family that protects $10 million in principal and lives only on a 5% annual return, $500,000 per year, will have that $10 million intact in 100 years. With compounding reinvestment, they may have $50 million. A family that spends principal in a crisis and replenishes it slowly will find the principal shrinks over time, and a shrinking principal produces shrinking returns, which produces more pressure to spend principal, which produces more shrinkage. It is a death spiral that looks like normal life until the money is simply gone. Nathan Mayer Rothschild reportedly said, "It requires a great deal of boldness and a great deal of caution to make a great fortune, and when you have got it, it requires 10 times as much wit to keep it." The principle is the engine. You protect the engine. Everything else is negotiable. Rule 3. Never spend principal. Build structures that enforce this because discipline alone will fail you. Old money. Rule 4. Education over inheritance. Here is a question that separates old money thinking from new money thinking almost more clearly than anything else. When you imagine leaving something to your children, what do you picture? New money tends to picture money, a number, an inheritance, a house, accounts, assets passed on at death. Old money tends to picture capability, knowledge, judgment, the ability to think about, manage, and grow wealth across a lifetime. The Rockefellers didn't just leave their children money, they educated them in finance before they could access any of it. John D. Rockefeller Jr. kept detailed records of his own allowance as a child, was expected to earn additional income through small jobs, and was taught to tithe and to save before he was taught anything about the vast fortune he would one day steward. Old money families historically sent their children not to the most prestigious universities for status, but to institutions and mentors who would teach them how money, law, governance, and power actually work. They apprenticed them in the family's operations. They gave them small amounts of capital to manage independently before giving them access to large amounts. They created consequences for poor financial decisions while the stakes were still manageable. There is a concept in wealth psychology called golden handcuffs. It describes children of wealth who receive large inheritances with no accompanying capability to manage them. The money arrives without the knowledge, without the discipline, without the psychological framework, and it destroys the recipient at the same time it disappears. Old money breaks this pattern by treating financial education as the primary inheritance. The money is secondary. The mindset, the knowledge, the judgment. These are what they pour into the next generation first. Because here is the truth. A person with the right psychology and no money will eventually have money. A person with money and the wrong psychology will eventually have no money. Rule 4. Educate before you inherit. Give capability before capital. Old money. Rule 5. Discretion is a form of power. Of all the rules of old money psychology, this one is perhaps the most counterintuitive in an era of social media, personal branding, and public performance. Old money is quiet. Deliberately, strategically, philosophically quiet. This is not shyness. This is not insecurity. This is not an inability to command a room. Old money families include some of the most socially powerful people in history, but they understood something about visibility that modern wealth culture has almost entirely forgotten. Visibility invites friction. When you display wealth loudly, you attract several things simultaneously. Admiration, yes, but also resentment, litigation, requests, manipulation, and bad actors. Every person who knows you are wealthy and is struggling themselves will, consciously or not, relate to your wealth as a resource they may be entitled to. Every business partner who knows your net worth has leverage in a negotiation. Every legal adversary who knows your assets has a target. Old money learned this across centuries of political upheaval. The families that survived revolutions, wars, and regime changes were not always the most powerful. They were often the least visible. The Medici survived because they were adaptable and discreet. The families who were loudest about their wealth in pre-revolutionary France were often the ones who lost their heads. This principle extends beyond safety into psychology. Quiet wealth creates a different internal relationship with money. When your worth is not performed for others, you don't need others' validation to feel secure in it. Your financial identity becomes internal rather than external, and that internal security is the foundation of every other rule on this list. You cannot protect principle if you are spending it to signal status. You cannot build the family as an institution if individual members are performing wealth independently. You cannot educate your children properly if the lifestyle you're performing contradicts the lessons you're trying to teach. Discretion is not just an old money aesthetic, it is the glue that holds the entire framework together. Rule 5. Discretion is power. Let the wealth work quietly. You don't need the world to know. The Medici story. Let us go back to Florence, 1397. Giovanni de' Medici establishes the Medici Bank. He is not from royalty. He is not from old aristocracy. He is a man of modest origins who has built something through disciplined financial practice and exceptional political intelligence. He applies every one of the rules we have discussed, though he wouldn't have called them rules. They were, to him, simply the way intelligent people treated money. He builds wealth as a tool. The Medici Bank does not exist to make Giovanni famous. It exists to generate returns and expand influence. He lives modestly relative to his wealth. He is careful about what he displays. He builds the family as the institution. He brings his sons Cosimo and Lorenzo into the business early, educates them in every aspect of its operations, and structures the family's financial interests to operate as a single coordinated entity. He protects the principal. The Medici Bank expands through retained earnings and strategic partnerships, not through reckless borrowing or personal consumption that drains the core. He educates before inheriting. Cosimo de' Medici, who would go on to become one of the most powerful men in European history, learned the banking business from childhood. He did not inherit a fortune. He inherited a capability. He practices discretion. Giovanni de' Medici was famously cautious about political involvement. He advised his sons to stay out of government unless absolutely necessary, because political visibility brought political risk. Do not attract the attention of the powerful, he reportedly told them. Cosimo ignored this last piece of advice and became ruler of Florence. But he kept everything else. And the Medici dynasty lasted 300 years, produced 4 popes, 2 queens of France, and funded artists including Botticelli, Leonardo da Vinci, and Michelangelo. Not because they were born great, because they built a psychology that wealth could survive. I want to be very direct with you now, because everything I've shared in this video can feel like a history lesson about people who are not you. But the psychology is available to you today, regardless of your bank account, regardless of your starting point, regardless of whether your family ever talked about money at all. Here are 5 things you can do this week, 1 for each rule. For Rule 1, wealth is a tool. Write down every purchase you have made in the last 30 days that was about signaling rather than living. Be honest. Then ask yourself, what would this money have built if I had invested it instead of displayed it? For Rule 2, the family is the institution. Have one financial conversation with someone you love that you have been avoiding, about a will, about a plan, about goals. Old money builds structures. Structures begin with conversations. For Rule 3, never spend principal. Define your principal, even if it's $500, even if it's $5,000. Decide on a number that you will not touch regardless of circumstances, and then build a structure around it, an account you cannot easily access, a rule you write down. For Rule 4, education over inheritance. Find one book, one course, one mentor this month that is specifically about financial management, investment, or wealth psychology. Commit to that education the way old money committed to it for their children, before the money, not after. For Rule 5, discretion is power. Spend 1 month not talking about money publicly, not posting about income, not discussing earnings with people who don't need to know, not performing financial status in any direction, wealthy or struggling. Notice how your relationship with money changes when it becomes internal. These 5 shifts will not make you the Medici family overnight, but they will begin to build the psychological architecture that wealth respects. And that is where every generational fortune has always started, not in a bank account, but in a belief system. The families that have stayed wealthy for 300 years share one thing more than any asset, any investment, any market advantage. They share a way of thinking about money that most people never learn. And most people never learn it because no one teaches it. Not in school, not in most homes, not in most financial advice. That's what this channel exists to do. If this story gave you something to think about, a rule you want to apply, a pattern you recognized in yourself, a shift you want to make, I want to hear about it. Drop a comment below. Which of the 5 rules hit hardest for you? Which one are you starting this week? Subscribe to MillionMindShift if you haven't already. We release a new wealth psychology story every single week. Stories the textbooks never tell. Lessons that money can't buy. Check the pinned comment for this week's reflection question. I read every single one of your answers. Until next time, think like old money. Build like old money. And remember, the most valuable thing you can pass down is not a number in an account. It is a way of seeing the world. Keep shifting. See you in the next video. Million Mind Shift, where every story is a lesson money can't buy.